So, in this video, notice this is an older program from Unit 7. We're going to update a little bit for Unit 8. Now, if you recall that previous video, we're at to 8.3.3 in the current way the curriculum is run, where we're talking about now nested for loops. And if you recall that previous video, or maybe you want to go back and rewatch it where I explain this entire program, we already used a nested loop. But I think we're gonna fix something here, give a little better explanation of exactly how nested loops work. So I think it's still instructive. The basic idea of this program is we made a little spaceship that you can move up and down with the arrow keys. If I press the space key, it'll shoot out bullets, and as it hits different blocks, it'll blow them up. And so right now, our current double for loop, our nested for loop, is running right here, where I check to see if the blocks and bullets are hitting each other. So, and I described this in the previous video, but it's worth repeating. Just like how you can nest if statements, where you can put an if statement inside of an if statement, maybe inside of another if statement, or an if inside of an else, or whatever. You can do the same thing with for loops. So I can make a for loop where I'm saying, hey, I'm going to run through every single block, every single one of these blocks in my entire program. And as I run through each one, so I'm going to pick this first block. Maybe it's this one right up over here. I'm going to pick that first block. And then once I pick that first block, before I go to the next block, I'm going to check every single bullet in my list of bullets that currently exist. And so that's what we're getting out of a nested for loop, is you can check one set of things, and for each of those things, we're also going to check a whole other list of other things. That's the basic idea. So let me run this. I did this in the previous video. I'll try to be quick about this. Let me run this, zoom out a little bit, get some bullets going, and then pause. So the idea where I've got for block and blocks, I'm going to check every single block. And for this block first, I'm going to start by saying, all right, that's that first block in the blocks. For this block, I'm going to check now each bullet. So I'm going to loop through all these blocks, but first I check this block, then I check bullet 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, it doesn't hit any of those. So then check the next block. I'll check bullets 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's our first example of a double for loop, a nested for loop, where we say that this loop is nested inside of this bigger outer loop. We can also add another nested for loop by, instead of just generating blocks 3 different times, is we can update this generate blocks function to make a grid, X by Y. So let's do that right now. Use the idea of nested for loops to, instead of calling generate blocks 3 times, we are going to make it X by Y. So now when I do generate blocks, how did this even work? The X was, literally just the X coordinate that we start on. So the new generate blocks, let's say we'll make just a whole new function, gen block grid. It's going to take in an X and a Y, and then I guess a width and a height. So the idea here is the X and the Y is going to be where I start making my grid of blocks, and the width and the height would be how many blocks wide and how many blocks tall I end up making it. And as promised, what we're going to do is for I in range, let's see, do I want to make it, I guess this doesn't really matter. You just choose in range W. So W is going to say how many columns I make. So for, say this was 3, that means we're going to make 3 columns. So for I in range W, and because I'm just putting a single W, it'll start from 0 to W, not including W, but since we start at 0, you get that number of columns. So for I in range W, and then I'll say for I guess J in range height, we are going to say blocks.add and a rectangle at Now here's the tough part. We're going to start at x, and then we're going to say, here's the tough part here that we need to think about. So I'm starting in the x coordinate here, and then we're going to add, how big are these rectangles? 18. We're going to add 20. Add 20 times I. I don't think that's changing from that over there. So the idea is that well, actually, this was really for the y in this other one. So we're going to say 20 times I, because what that's going to be is the first time through, I will be 0. So adding 20 times 0, it'll just be at the x coordinate. Then the second time we run through the outer loop, I will be 1. So I want to move it 20 to the right. So it'll be x plus 20 times 1. And then I will become 2, and then 3, going on until, but not including w. So that's the x coordinate. Then we want to do the y coordinate. So I'll say y, and then I'll say plus j times 20. And maybe I want to keep this consistent where it'll be I times 20. And now the idea here, maybe you want to put a little space there to make it a little easier to see like that other one. We'll start at the y, and then we'll go to the next one below each time. And then this will be 18 and 18. So I think this is what we need, and we'll do little smaller examples of it when, once we see that it works. So what I'm going to do here now is, instead of generating the blocks here, and I can comment that out like that, I want to generate block grid starting at 300 0. Okay. So we're going to generate the block grid starting at 300 0, and we want it to be 3 columns by 20 rows. And if we run it right now, dang. Oh, just the colon there. Hey, it works. We did it. Now you're saying, what are you talking about, Mr. Adler? It works. Nothing changed. But exactly, right? We made the thing. I input the parameters such that it would look identical. But watch this. Maybe I want to make this not the full grid. Maybe I'll make it 4 by 5. And now when I run it, we've got a little grid over here. 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We made a grid using our nested for loop. So that's pretty cool. Let's make it starting at, let's say 300's good, but we'll say 100. And let's just make this a 2 by 3 so we can try to really see exactly how it runs through. So I'm just changing the coordinates of it. And this is nice. The fact that we've got generate block grid with all this information here, we can really be like, it doesn't just need to be a full column or whatever. We can kind of make this grid wherever we want. Let's see exactly how we make these 6 blocks over here. And I'm going to keep kind of going back and forth like this. All right. So we said gen block grid, and the current command is gen block grid, just so I don't need to scroll down. But we had it at, what was it? 300, 100, and 2 and 3. 2 and 3. Okay. So, 300, 100 is just where we start, right? 300, 100. Great. Happy about that. And then the width being 2 and the height being 3, well, I see 2 blocks, 2 columns, and 3 rows. Now let's go. Let's do the hard part. Now maybe I'll draw some comments in here just to kind of keep track of the things. So we're going to have a comment tracking I. So we're going to start out, all right, for I in range W, and we know that W is actually 2 here. So I is going to start out by being set to 0. That's what I do on line 14. Next, I'll just zoom in a tiny bit more just so it's easier to see all the text. Next, what I do is I go from line 14 to line 15. Well, I make the j variable, and I set it equal to also j equals 0, because when I use range with only 1, it starts off at 0 by default. Okay, Now that we have I and j at 0 from the start, we move on to now line 17, which lives inside of the j loop, the height loop, which itself lives inside of the I loop. And let's just see how it runs explicitly so you can really understand this nested for loop. So what I'm going to do is, to the blocks group, I'm going to add a new rectangle at the x coordinate that I input, so at 300, but plus I times 20. Well, I, we can see here on line 12, I is actually 0, so 20 times 0 is 0. So we're just going to put it at the initial x that they asked us to put it at. Great. And next, I'll say the y plus j times 20. Well, the initial y that we input, and again, this input is coming from, hey, I wanted to generate this block grid. Here's the input that I came up with, right? You can always change to make different grids, just so we're all on the same page here. So I said the y was 100. So I'm going to say 100, right? The y is 100, right? The y matches the input there is 100. The y is 100 plus j times 20. Well, j is 0, so it's just going to be at 100 with a width and height for that block of 18 by 18. And this is what we got. 300, 100, width and height 18, 18. Bada boom. Next, here's now the nested for loop part. We end line 17, so we go back to the top of the loop that we're currently in. So I'm going to the top of this loop right over here. So I'm now going, all right, j is iterating to the next thing. So j plus 1, it'll go from 0 to 1. We're not at the end of the range yet because it's not 3. So we're going to go again. Well, we go down to line 17, adding a new rectangle at x plus I times 20. I is still 0, so it's still going to be at 300. But then the y coordinate is 100 plus j times 20. Well, j is currently 1, so it'll be 100 plus 20. And that's how we now make, from this first block, make the second block at 300, 120. Great. That's why it works. We finished line 17, so now we go back to the loop that we're currently in, update j again. J gets updated to being from 1 to 2. Well, 2 is still not at the end of my range yet, almost there, but we still do go into this loop again. We're going to add another block. Again, the the x coordinate is x plus I times 20. I is still 0, so we're still going to keep our x coordinate at 300. And then y is going to be the 100 plus j times 20. Well, j happens to be 2. 2 times 20 is 40. So now we're going to be at 300 in the x and 140 in the y. And so let's check our third block here. 300 in the x, 140 in the y. It's all working. Now what happens is, and pardon me if this isn't exactly how for loops work, but in Python, but I'm pretty sure what ends up happening is j gets updated to 3. Because my range h, right, h was 3, and you don't include that top number in the range, now that j is 3, we are done. We exit this j loop. So now that we're done with this j loop, we're kind of back to the bottom of line 17. And what that means is, well, we exit this j loop, we have to now go back up to the top of this I loop. We're not done looping on the i's yet. So I is now going to finally get updated from 0 to 1. And now that we're done with line 15, we come back to like line 16 from the start, and now we start this loop all over again. J gets reset to 0, and we do the whole j part again, right? Let's just run this one other block, and well, I might as well, if you want to watch it, you can watch it. J is now reset to 0 because we're reapproaching this for loop from the top instead of looping from below. J gets reset to 0. Now we're going to make the new rectangle over here at, well, the I has been updated now, right? X plus I times 20. I is no longer 0, so I'm actually going to do 300 plus 1 times 20, 320. The Y is y plus j times 20. Well, j is 0, so it's just going to be the y, which is 100. And that's how we get this block over here at 320, 100. And now I'll go a little faster here. We're done with line 17, so we come back up Well, we're still inside of the J loop now because we re-entered the J loop. J is now going to get updated to 1, and now we'll be at that same 320, but now it becomes 320 and 120, right? J gets updated again to 2, and then that 320, 140. J gets updated to 3, which means we get to exit the J loop, and we come back over here to the I loop. I gets updated to 2. Because my W is 2 and the range doesn't include that top one, we finally finish the loop, exit the whole loop. We finally get to continue on to wherever we were before, right? We actually exit that loop, exit this function, come back to line 50, and there's nothing below line 50, so we're done. And that's like a quick explanation of how that nested loop works. And the really nice thing here is now that we have this as a gen block grid and we understand how it works, I can make bigger grids, right? I can say, hey, you know what? I want this to be 4 by 10, and all of a sudden, bada boom, it just does it for us, right? Because computers are cool like that. And because they were being added to that group, those blocks still function by getting shot at. And now this way, I can maybe even generate some different levels or something, right? I can now generate a block grid at, I don't know, 250, and we'll make this a like 3 by 3. And now I kind of have these 2 separate grid areas where I got one up over there and another one down over there. And it's just cool. So that is the example. You can always check back on 734 for an explanation of how this works, even though I think I touched upon that at the beginning of this video. And now we added, instead of just a generate block, maybe I should call it generate block column instead. We've now implemented a generate block grid using a nested for loop. Yeah, that's all I got for you. I will update this now. I'll save as so I can keep the old one to, you can see what I did most recently. I believe this was 8.3.3 gen block grid. Maybe I'll call it like sand shooter update gen block grid. Alrighty. That's it. Hopefully you got something out of this video. Nested for loops, pretty cool. I did say in the other video, and I should say it again, nested for loops are cool. You can definitely use them to do cool stuff. They are like doing a lot of work, right? You're putting a loop inside of a loop. You're doing extra things. If you put a loop inside of a loop inside of a loop, right, you could do even like a 3 times loop. Your program might start lagging a little bit. So just be careful in how many of these double nested loops you end up putting in there, or triple loops or whatever. But yeah, anyways, that's my little public safety announcement. I'll see you next time. Hope you enjoyed.